Hey everyone, Will here. Uh, Wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind quite a bit for a while now, and as it relates to our lives, kind of all encompassing. You look at either Jehovah's Witness. Obviously, if you're watching this channel, you probably at least know someone who's a Jehovah's Witness, and and the topic's been touched upon quite a bit when you look at us versus them mentalities. I'm kind of taking a broader look at it as a black and white versus gray area, and how we think and view uh, the world, our existence. And you look at what the framework is of how and why you think the way you do, and what and challenging that, right? I think it's important for growth to challenge any notions that you have or presupposed ideas or thoughts. And the topic of a gray area has that I'm at the in a position that I think life is lived in a gray area, which is the antithesis of much of the Jehovah's Witness existence, right? It's always black and white for them. Um, that's how they're taught and trained to think. That's very common with high control groups, as I imagine all of you watching this already know. Uh, I think also the more I've grown, when you look at my younger years, I was much more of a black and white thinker. I think a lot of us when we're younger, regardless of being raised in a cult or not, I think there's a tendency a lot of times to think in black and white. Um, I could be wrong. I don't have any analytical data to support that. And I'm just coming from my experience. So, take it with a grain of salt, right? Now, I do think there are some things that obviously are black and white, right? And I think those things tend to be instinctual. Take rape, for instance. I don't think there's ever an instance when rape is okay. That's a very black and white issue for me. But then you take the issue of murder, and on the surface, yes, murder's wrong, but sometimes killing someone is justified. So it ends up being a bit of a gray area from my way of thinking. Now, I'm not abdicating going and killing anyone, obviously, but just using that as an example that there's so many more layers to life and understanding that it's very hard to put many things from my perspective in a black and white category. And I look at the way black and white thinking or us versus them mentality is used. You're gonna find like the shunning policies with Jehovah's Witnesses. That's a black and white thinking that is not biblical. And look at the evils that then creates. It tears apart families. It causes suicides. It causes all type of issues. I don't need to go into that. I think most of us understand those things, right? And when you when you even stop to think about the shunning policies that exist for Jehovah's Witnesses, when they say that the normal family relations are supposed to exist still, but you can't talk about religion with a disfellowship person. If you're believing in God and that's the focus of your life, it seems to make sense to me that the one thing you should be talking about with someone that is struggling with their spirituality, the one thing you should be talking about would be your beliefs. That would seem to be the thing that the person is struggling with, uh, from your perspective anyway, from a Jehovah's Witness perspective. Someone's disfellowship, therefore they're spiritually weak, right? So shouldn't the one thing that isn't off limits be to actually talk to that person about spiritual topics? Like, and that's something I've thought for a long time. I don't know if I've ever voiced it before or not, but it just doesn't, again, though you're dealing with a high control group. So I understand why they do it, but stop and think for a minute. Like, question why you think the way you do. And it goes back to the ingrained black and white thinking. The us versus them mentality, right? You look at the black and white thinking in a lot of religious tradition and look at it throughout history, and it's not living in the gray, it's black and white thinking that has caused most of the world's evils. Go back to the Crusades, go back to, um, I mean, go to the world wars, and it's always these people over here are evil or horrible, and we have to go kill them. And it just doesn't add up. Or take the more recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. I can understand that our political leaders have, on a lot of these cases, caused the terrorists. Take bin Laden, right? We kind of created him because we screwed him over. And I could understand where he would be like, well, all Americans are evil. But again, he's looking at black and white thinking when in reality it was just a few people. But it wasn't all of Americans. It was, again, you go back again, it's black and white thinking. And you go into a society that is highly controlled, you also are going to have people raised in that us versus them mentality. And so it makes sense, right? It's messed up. It exists that way, but it makes sense. Go to Hitler. The Jews were the demons for him, right? And it was, again, black and white thinking. These people were just living their lives trying to get by like everyone else, but all of a sudden they're evil, right? Like, according to Hitler. And you can pretty much do this for most things throughout history. You're going to find, instead of operating in the gray, there was a focus on just black and white. But it's not. There's not a. I can't really find too many things, like I've already said, that it's just black and white. When you look at, going back to religion, when you look at, um, Jesus, what he did biblically is he operated in the gray. He lived in the gray area, right? He was eating with the sinners and the worst people of their society, and they're black and white. It's just the law way of thinking. When you see the times when Jesus got angry, like when he went to the temple and was, turning over the tables and chasing them out, he was upset at the black and white thinkers when he talks to the Pharisees and calls them vipers. And right, they were very black and white, us versus them. And Jesus was like, no, this is so wrong. And so, yeah, he got upset because these people are perpetrating evils. You look at the example of the woman caught in adultery, right? Now, the law, the black and white, said Yeah, kill her, put her to death. But, let's operate in the gray for a minute. If you're without sin, you cast the first stone, right? So again, it was a matter of Jesus even came to show that it was a gray area we should exist in. Not everything is just black and white. You have to take life into account, right? And so you look at a lot of the fundamentalist religions in the world of all denominations, and you're going to find that black and white thinking, and that perpetrates evils on from small scale all the way up to global scale. And let's see. Let's go back to even looking at slavery, right? Now, when there's been a number of people that have commented and number on my videos, and there's been a lot of information out there with people saying that the Bible supports slavery. And when you go back to the Old Testament and look at it, they're thinking of it in a black and white in the context of the slavery that existed here in the US, which is nothing like what is mentioned in the Bible among the Jewish culture. It's more accurately described as indentured servitude. There was always an end date to said servitude, right? And even the slaves in Jewish society could own property. They made money, and they had rights and protections under the law. Now, was it perfect? No, I'm not saying it was. Does it match up with modern standards? No, obviously it doesn't, right? But it was quite different from the slavery that existed among a lot of the other nations, right? It wasn't the same thing. You go and look at. I'll back up for a second. So when you look at the creation of the slave Bible by those dudes up in England back in the day, and the slave Bible that was handed out to the slaves in the U.S. and other areas, it took out the entire book of Exodus. It was like it took out all the stuff in the Old Testament about slavery and basically describing it as indentured servitude and not slavery. And it's very pared down. It's not, obviously it's not, it wouldn't be considered a Bible. It's just historically referred to as the slave Bible, right? So if the Bible supported slavery, why was it so heavily redacted? And let's go forward to the New Testament. A lot of people use the Jesus saying, be in subjection to your masters. They use that. Oh, see, Jesus supported slavery. Well, again, look at it in historical context. By then, you had, um, about 100 years before that, you had the Third Servile War that happened in 70 BC with Rome, and we know that Israel uh, was being ruled by Rome at the time, right? That's no big secret. Now, after the Third Servile War, that's the one with Spartacus and all that. And that's where all the guys were crucified on the Appian Way for like, I think it was 60 miles or something like that, outside of Rome. And so after that Third Servile War, they're like, Rome was like, this crap's got to stop happening, right? Like, so anything that even smelled of a slave revolt after that, I mean, the entire area was just destroyed. So if it came out, if it was seen to the Roman leaders like Christians were gonna start a slave revolt, then I mean it would have been all over. Like they weren't gonna have this happen again because in particular with the Third Civil War with Spartacus. I mean, the dude came close to really destroying the Roman Empire. And so they didn't want to take a chance on this happening again. But then again, you look in the New Testament and you look at oh crap, I'm drawing a blank, but basically, it's talking about that all men are equal and to treat them as your brothers, even if you're a slave owner under the Roman culture, that you're to treat this individual like your brother. So again, it doesn't match up with the type of slavery that existed in this country as far as how you're supposed to look at these people, right? Or how you're supposed to understand it. So the paradigm was it was kind of like a death knell for slavery in the long term. Granted, being humans, we're fairly retarded at times, and it takes a while, right? And you have evil people that band together and do evil things. That's a given. Anyway, I think I've kind of beat that dead horse. If if anyone wants more information on that stuff or wants me to do something else on it, let me know. So another thing, just a kind of side note. I don't know if I mentioned this before either, but the Jehovah's Witnesses like to use that scripture that the meek will inherit the earth. Now, in English, we hear the word meek, we're going to think of kind of like a sheepish person that doesn't stand up for themselves. That's just, um, like kind of like cowering a little bit almost, like it doesn't have positive connotations. Now, when you go back to the original language, that word that's translated as meek into English is actually a, it's talking about strength held in reserve or strength restrained. So, if it's someone that's not going over the top, it's someone that is staying in control of their emotions and not losing it, right? Or not taking things too far. Uh, it, it, it doesn't really match up again with black and white of, oh, you have to be this meek little follower. It's kind of like, you don't have to take things lying down, but you also don't have to go overkill and do things that are just instinctually wrong, right? Another thing biblically about gray area, which is you look at the book of Esther. We've been covering Esther in in my at my church the last few weeks, and it's been an interesting read. And when the Jehovah's Witnesses cover it, they don't really, and this is something I noticed a long time ago too, is they don't really explain what's happening very well. They don't understand it. And but when you look at the book of Esther, it's like the whole thing is an operation inside the gray area. The reason that she was became queen is because she was good in bed. You know, she knew how to please the king. She was pleasing to the king. She had been trained for a year to be pleasing to the king. When you actually look historically about what it means to be part of these harems and whatnot, it's not like they just hung out and didn't do anything. They were learning how to be good in bed, as that was part of it. And so when it says that, she was pleasing to the king, that's what we're talking about. And again, that it it doesn't feel right, does it? I mean, that's one of those things that on the surface it's like, okay, black and white. And look at my situation, right? being raised in a cult, being raped and beaten for a decade of my youth. And yeah, instinctually, that stuff's evil, black and white, it's wrong. Like, I agree with that all day long. But then when you get into to kind of thinking about it, and in a weird way, like as far as there's many references in the scripture that you look at, and it's like bad and evil things can be used for good. And that's where I look at my life and I'm like, well, I've actually been able to help quite a few people that have gone through a lot of the crap I have in life. I've been able to help some folks with healing from that because of the experience I had, and because other people helped me get through it, right? So then there's a gray area of, not that you would ever want the bad things to happen, but hey, I can actually use this for good now. And it's, I don't know if that's quite a gray area, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. And as far as like, um, well, then you look more at Esther as well, Book of Esther, and you see a person that's in an impossible situation, and they're kind of stuck, right? Like there's not much she can do, but yet she also uses her brain, and the way she sets up the situations to save the Jewish people is genius. I mean, she was smart. She understood her audience and how to get what she needed, and you got to give her a lot of credit for that. That she didn't just give up. Like she was like, all right, I can do something here, and I just got to be smart about it. And I think that can apply to most areas of our lives as well. Now, and to following forward to challenging suppositions or preconceived ideas or notions. Um, when you start looking at you look at most of the world's religions, and there's gonna be an aspect there of ascending to a higher plane of existence, right? Like I believe that God could definitely and did share a lot of truth with people. Uh, like the Old Testament, it's not like it covers everything. Do I think that God was, or some people weren't able to find God outside of the Jews? Of course I do. I don't know why I wouldn't. It's not like the Old Testament is the end all be all. Like there's other stuff out there. Like there's so much more that was happening in the world. And you go to all the different religions, and you're gonna find similarities, at least on a surface level. Quite a bit of similarities with a lot of them. And one of the aspects of that is reaching a higher plane of existence. If you're familiar with sci-fi, if you're into sci-fi, there's like this show, like the Stargate thing, and I like it. I'm a sci-fi guy, and one of the things about that show is it talks about this race of beings that ascended from having human bodies to existing as energy, right? And that is in essence what most religions speak of. You think about heaven, that's ascension. That is reaching a higher plane of existence beyond our physical bodies. When you look in the Greek of the oikaterion, that glorified body that is spoken of in the New Testament, that is basically ascension. That's reaching a higher plane of existence. And so, again, when you start challenging all these notions you have, or thinking about why do I feel this way, or how does this compare to other things in life, and it's gonna, for me, it makes it very hard for me to be a fundamentalist about anything, or even look at the nature of God versus the nature of man, the subject of the Trinity. I do believe in the the Trinity, but it's going to be kind of an expanded view of that, I guess. Or I have questions, perhaps. Um, when you look at how God took a piece of Adam to make Eve, right? It's like he's taking genetic material from Adam to make Eve. It didn't make her a new species. She was still human. It was just like, taking some a piece of him to make her. When you look at how Jesus is described, it's like God took a piece of himself and made Jesus, right? And so you would have Eve from Adam being human in nature. You would have Jesus being God in nature from because he came from God. He is of the same makeup. He is in nature God. And then you have the Holy Spirit, the helper is would be in nature God. But then when you stop thinking about that, if it's described more as it's almost like you're describing a race of beings. So I do question how monotheistic versus polytheistic, um, at the core, Christianity actually is. Because when you look at the Greek pantheon, it was like a race of gods. There were many gods, but it was one race. And you go back to Echad, the Jewish word for one, when it talks about a man and a woman being one, that same word of that unity, that oneness, is the same word that describes God as being one. So I don't really know where I stand on Christianity being polytheistic or monotheistic. Are you talking about it as it's not modalism? Modalism is very easily disproved. But are we talking one as in he's one being? No, because that's one person rather. Like that's modalism. That can't exist biblically. Are we talking about one as in the nature of God? Are we talking about there's one human race, there's one race of God? I don't really know. I'd have to do a lot more research into a lot of this stuff. But again, I think there's a lot more gray area than a lot of theologists, a lot of everyone would have you believe that tries to tell you this is just the way it is. Obviously, some things are fairly provable, like we know gravity exists. That's pretty black and white. But when you get into these other realms of things, it I would I would encourage everyone out there to challenge their beliefs and actually research it. Don't just take someone else's research, right? Actually look stuff up yourself. So I feel like I'm kind of rambling on for a bit. Let's just see. And had a few notes written down just to try to cover a lot of this topic. I know I don't make many videos, but I kind of felt like I had to speak on this topic. Anyway, so also that Jehovah's Witness, that last video I had, he hasn't come back, which is pretty funny. Apparently, a little bit of Bible truth scared him away. I must not be honest-hearted for the Jehovah's Witness. I must be. It's a black and white issue, right? If I don't agree with them, I must be a servant of the devil, right? That's how they would believe it. There's no hope for me because I don't believe the way they do. Very black and white, right? So anyway, well, y'all have a good one, and thanks for hanging in there for almost 30 minutes, and y'all take it easy. If you have any, as always, leave some comments. Tell me Tell me stuff. If you want me to cover certain things, tell me. And I hope everyone's well. Y'all take it easy.